Hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
Do you guys work at Apple?
No, I don't.
Well,
Okay.
this is an Apple fabrication plant.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you though not to go to the front of the building though. I will ask you that. Okay.
Oh, so you don't work for Apple?
I don't, but you can't be in front of the building.
Okay. I know,
Okay.
but under what authority are you asking?
I'm just asking you not to.
Wait, I'm asking who you are to ask us not
I'm not
to.
gonna let you know who I am.
Okay, well then we don't necessarily have to
Okay.
comply because
No
you're not
worries.
letting us know under what authority you're asking.
No
us.
worries.
Why is there no Apple sign
I'm
here?
just asking you nicely not to go
Yeah,
to
I
the
know.
front
Well,
door
I don't
and take
understand.
a picture
I
like
don't
you just
understand.
did.
Yeah, well, we can take pictures. It's
Okay.
free.
This is
No
where the
worries.
public-
It's called
But
democracy.
up there it's not.
Yeah. Oh, so
That's public property, right?
who are
So
you?
you did go up there and you took a picture. I'm gonna ask you not to do that again.
Okay.
Okay, it's that we're
Well, we
trying to
wanted-
be peaceful. We're gonna let you do what you're doing.
And what company do you work for then if you don't
That's
work
not
for Apple?
necessary for you to know where I work at. I work for the 49ers. So, please,
Really? You work for the
pictures-
49ers?
No pictures up at the front, okay?
So you're
hold
giving
on,
us an
hold
order?
on. Let's just keep it peaceful. I'm not trying to order you at all. I'm just asking you, sir. I did see you
Yeah.
take pictures up there. I'm asking
So
you not.
I'm
to.
asking you
I'm
nicely.
asking you not. to.
I'm asking you nicely.
Yes.
Under what authority are you asking that? of
I'm
us?
under the law enforcement authority.
So you're a member of the law enforcement.
I might be.
So you
Yeah.
should then identify yourself if you're a member of the law enforcement.
So I want to welcome everyone here today. My name is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm with the United Front Committee for Labor Party. Also, I'm a journalist, and we're here today to demand health and safety for the community here, for the workers at this plant, and for the community people who live in the building across the street. We're in Santa Clara, and this fabrication plant is owned by Apple company. You wouldn't know it because there's no Apple signs, there's no Apple identification. And what we have discovered is that, in fact, Apple is running this factory illegally. It's been fined, or they've been sued by the EPA. They refuse to go public, and they've been actually releasing toxics from this plant illegally. And there's been a cover-up, and that's why we're here today, because we want to expose this illegal activity, and we want to demand that this plant be shut down. And Apple is very careful about this because no one knows, even the people in the neighborhood, that there's a fabrication facility here. So how did we find out about this situation here in Santa Clara on Scott Boulevard? The reason is a Apple engineering manager, Ashley Gjøvik, was working at her office, and she discovered she was getting sick at her office, and she discovered that it was a dump site, highly toxic dump site. So she was getting sick, and she asked Apple to do a investigation. Eventually, she called the EPA to do an investigation of this toxic dump site. There were fumes coming up at her office, and she was getting sick. And also, as soon as she began to ask for a EPA investigation, they retaliated against her. They threatened her, they intimidated her, and they actually took pictures of her illegally with their phone of her naked. So they did all kinds of, I would say, nefarious activities. And she began to say that she had a right as a worker, which she was at Apple, to take up the issue of health and safety, that it's not illegal to speak out about health and safety. You should not be retaliated against for speaking out about health and safety. That's illegal. However, she was retaliated against. She filed a complaint with OSHA, state OSHA, with federal OSHA, and the NLRB that she was being retaliated against for speaking out about the health and safety at her facility. So what happened was she got sick, and eventually she was fired, terminated by Apple, and she's been terminated, and she's been fighting for her job back since, and she's been fighting to make the community aware. Now, I don't think there are many demonstrations in Santa Clara, and I know there have been no demonstrations at this Apple fabrication plant. This company has hired police, FBI agents, CIA agents. In fact, Lisa Jackson was hired by Apple to be in charge of their government and environmental relations. Lisa Jackson was head of the EPA. So Lisa Jackson tried to bring in her own people at Apple. And there's been no investigation by the state of California. Gavin Newsom, who proclaims that he's for the people of California, he has done nothing to get the departments of California to investigate the toxins here and the illegality. The problem is because of the corporate media control by Apple, people even across the street who are living here do not even know that it's spewing toxins and dioxin dioxins, and that it's been fine. And the city of Santa Clara, which actually the fire department and the police, they should be investigating. So why is it that here in Santa Clara, in the center of tech, in the United States, you have a factory, an Apple factory that's polluting, that's contaminating and poisoning the workers and the people, and there's no coverage, there's no media of it. But that's exactly why we're here. We're going to have Ashley, who's going to be speaking to us about what's happened here and why we're having this press conference and why it's important that the people of Santa Clara, the workers, the unions, take up a stand to defend our right for a health and safety environment, and also for enforcement of the laws at the Apple Corporation. So welcome, Ashley.
So thank you so much for being there. For everyone that showed up, I really, really appreciate it. As Steve mentioned, it's so uncommon to have any kind of protests in Santa Clara and Silicon Valley. These companies shut them down so quickly. And I really wish I could be there in person. Apple's drawn out my whistleblower fight for 4 years now. I'm in Chapter 7 bankruptcy in Boston, so I couldn't fly over. And that's the kind of company they are. The government's not in my favor on the retaliation claims, but then hearings are canceled. I'm pursuing the civil litigation, but Apple's deployed probably $50 million worth of litigation funds to defend me on principle and spite. So I'm in bankruptcy, but I'm there with good spirit, and thank you so much for being there. And Steve, thank you so much for that background on my story. What I want to tell everyone that I think is so critical, that you're getting a very rare glimpse now of what the real underlying story is. What Steve shared with you is the common narrative that even Apple will eventually acquiesce to, and it's all true. But what I didn't know is before I was reporting issues at my Superfund site office that year before, I got very, very ill, and they thought I was dying. I was so severely ill. I saw so many doctors. I had very concrete medical issues that no one could explain until we realized that it all fit chemical exposure. And it was occurring in my home. I lived in those apartments, the Santa Clara Square apartments. I move in, and within a week, I'm in the emergency room. I'm on disability. They're screening me for MS, for brain tumors, for fatal arrhythmias. I'd been in fine health right before that. So I'm going through all this. No one can figure out what's going on. I eventually find out in September 2021, through happenstance, that there's some kind of chemicals in my apartment setting off a meter, and talking to some doctors and realizing everything I'm experiencing represents acute exposure to chemicals, solvents, toxic gases, benzene. All of it fits. That's the only explanation. I get an industrial hygienist. I go do blood and medical tests. They find it in my urine. They find it in my blood. We find it in my air. The open question is, where is it coming from? That area you're standing in is also on a Superfund site. This is another one. Welcome to Silicon Valley. And a toxic waste cleanup site. So the thought was, could it be coming from that? But no one could explain it, how I could suddenly be so sick. And I couldn't get any help. The government wasn't doing anything. I did move out. I started feeling better. I started doing advocacy of figuring out, like, are other people sick? Can someone look into it? I published an article in San Francisco's Bayview in March 2021. Immediately, multiple other victims from that apartment complex come forward who were also severely made ill. In 2020 and 2021 at least. And we're organizing, we're also complaining to the government. We're talking to DTSC, we're talking to the mayor, we're talking to the county. I have other people sending detailed emails with images of rashes and burns and medical records and describing arrhythmias and gross, internal and external gross. And we're saying, what is happening at this location? And we don't know. And then all of the stuff that Steve explained to you about my story unfolded. And what I did not know was that contamination was coming from that, Steve pointed that factory, that goddamn factory. It was coming from that factory, and we know this because Apple even self-reported quietly and without permits that they were dumping at least 8 metric tons of toxic waste into the air every year from that factory. And you will notice it is 1 story tall. I believe they've put in some additional vents that are a little bit higher now. But the records show that while I was there in 2020 and other people were getting sick in 2020, there weren't even the tall vents. There weren't even any kind of stacks. They were just dumping it into that common air. It was pooling into those parks. It was pooling into those public walkways. And if you look at those apartments, you're going to see a ton of open windows. You're going to see fresh air intakes, is what they call them, on the roof. On the sides, they're pulling in what's supposed to be fresh air. It is Apple's semiconductor fabrication exhaust that they were pulling into those apartment units. And when we start mapping it all out, we figure that I was getting a higher dose of that than others. And the other ones with the really severe illnesses, all in those vectors, coming from Apple's fab. When I connect the blood test, the urine test, the industrial hygienist, it's Apple's chemicals. It was all matching what they were doing. We go find out they didn't have required permits. They weren't telling anyone they were doing fab. This isn't some kind of research and development facility. This isn't even some kind of just typical manufacturing. Semiconductor fab is comparable to nuclear. It is extraordinarily dangerous, and Silicon Valley has a very long history, especially in the 90s, of these kinds of activities having tons of community protest because they're so dangerous. They make workers sick. Generally, non-white, poor workers were the ones getting the sickest, and people weren't representing. That's when we started unionizing in the 90s in Silicon Valley, and that's exactly when they started offshoring these factories. If you also look at the Superfund sites in Silicon Valley, the majority are from fab. Fab's just like Apple. Apple was also caught pouring stuff down the drain it's not supposed to, like TCE. It didn't even report that it has TCE on site in 2025, and it was pouring it down the drain into the sewer under those apartments. If you look at that factory and where it sits next to those apartments, the sewers go to the apartments and around those apartments. So whatever Apple's pouring down their drain was in the shared sewer system of all of those units. 1,800 units. Families, children, elderly. They're venting it from the air. They're venting it into the sewer. Also caught unexpected spikes of solvents in the groundwater, which appears Apple was maybe even dumping into the groundwater wells from the existing toxic waste sites. We'll find out with the lawsuit. They were engaging in such insanely reckless behavior that in my civil litigation, my whistleblower litigation, when I tried to sue them for these toxic torts for what they did to me, for nearly, literally almost killing me, Apple's defense was they did file a couple things on paper, and it was my fault for not figuring out sooner while I still worked for them, and they were actively retaliating against my Superfund office. It's my fault I didn't figure out that they were the ones who almost killed me, and so statute of limitations has run out for my claim. And the judge agreed.
Oh.
And Apple cited the city permits that the Santa Clara Hazardous Waste Group and Fire Department approved what they were doing, knowing they didn't have the permits, knowing it was so dangerous it should never be in that zoning area, should never be next to residential, but said if they approved, we didn't do anything wrong. And there's enough stuff on the internet, if you search through all the permits to figure out we're doing fab, that you would have figured out it's so crazy to do fab next to the apartments, of course we almost killed you. And they hid that from me. I did not find that out until 2023, and they fired me in 2021. They tried to cover it all up. It got dismissed. And that's why I've given a 60-day notice to Apple, City of Santa Clara, and the property owner that if DOJ does not sue Apple over this, by September 1st, I'm going to file an EPA citizen suit. And I'm going to sue Apple as the DOJ under RCRA, under EPCRA, Community Right to Know, under Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and the Toxic Substance Control Act, and a public nuisance suit. I'm going to do it all. EPA did, they were going to sue Apple in administrative court with their ALJs for RCRA violations. They should have filed it by now. The only thing that's happened in between was Apple CEO Tim Cook gave Gjøvik President Tim Cook a literally 24-karat gold-plated trophy with his name on it. And then suddenly it hasn't been filed yet. So this is the exact kind of reason we have these citizen suits. This is the exact reason citizens can file public nuisance suits. It's just that the government's not doing anything. It's hurting the community. It's killing the community. This is completely outrageous, and citizens can take this stuff into their own hands, which I absolutely plan to do. And one of the first things I'm going to ask the court to do is to order this factory to shut down until it can be restarted in compliance with just very basic laws, if it can be at all based on that zoning. Imagine, you're looking at that fab, it looks like it could be an office building. It is one of the most dangerous types of manufacturing known to man. We know this, it's really well documented. Again, this is why they had to offshore fab in the 90s, because people were so upset about them doing this next to anything with living life. So you look at that, it's just crazy. You don't have that next to apartments. You don't have that next to public parks. You don't have that next to sensitive receptors. You don't have that next to churches. You don't have that next to a grocery store. You look around you within 1,000 feet, and you're going to find some of the most vulnerable types of situations where no one's expecting. They're walking down a sidewalk or sitting on a patio or sitting in their living room, in my case, in bed at night, and being exposed to some of the most toxic, lethal chemicals you can imagine. I found in my blood tests, my urine tests, with the VOC monitors going, I caught one night before I had moved out, arsen gas exposure in my bedroom. And the little bit of the fire department reporting they did do, they reported Apple was repeatedly, accidentally leaking phosphine, styrene, fluorine, they had arsen. These are toxic gases that was the biggest uproar in the 90s because they can just kill you within like minutes. There's no antidote. Most of them you can't even smell until it's too late. This is Bhopal, India. This was the instructive Bhopal of if you have these anywhere near sensitive areas, you could literally have a toxic gas cloud that could kill an entire community within minutes. So it's just facially insane to have that so close. And then Apple, of course, wants to make it look like it's a nondescript office without their logo and no warnings whatsoever. This is exactly why we have community right to know, is because when corporations were doing like that, they were literally killing people. They were killing people fast, they were killing people slow, and they were covering it all up. And so the community has a right to know that if industry is going to be doing this kind of stuff or trying to do this stuff in their community, they need to know where they're doing it, what they're doing, what they're using, when they have releases, what their mitigation plans are, to communicate when they have leaks. All of this is federal law. It's federal law since the 80s and 90s, and Apple has violated all of it. And as you can see, their bad faith facility, you'd walk by that and have no idea. And what Apple said to me is, yes, Ashley, we did retaliate against you and ruin your life about all that other stuff too. And yes, we also did almost murder you. But you should have figured out, looking at that factory, that what we were doing could have murdered you in your sleep in your bedroom. And so, Ashley, it's your fault that you didn't complain sooner and figure it out it was us. And so that's why I ask all of you to look around and really take in that situation. It's not being covered in the press. It's not being covered with community organizing. I posted this on Nextdoor, and the majority of the comments were defending the toxic waste dumping. Because it's Silicon Valley and people are insane. The toxic culture there is always defend industry. And that can go to it can exist in parallel, except for when it actively harms people, like children on playgrounds. People sleeping in their beds. That's no tolerance for me. So I ask you all to take this and to share this with others, to investigate. I have tons of records about this stuff on my website, but a lot of it's public records for your own research too. Talk to other people. Figure out if other people were sick. Start organizing together. Apple's surely not the only one doing this. This is by far, though, the most egregious situation I've ever seen. And knowing Apple, they also use all their NDAs and say everything's confidential. So employees are probably getting sick. Employees probably also know all of the crimes that are happening in that building and are too afraid to say anything. Especially if you see Nextdoor and everyone's defending the toxic waste dumping. So we need to come together as a community like we did in the 90s. Like we did in this exact kind of area and say this is completely unacceptable. I don't care what kind of jobs you're bringing. You're killing people at the jobs and outside them and destroying the environment around it. This is not okay. So Apple needs to shut this factory down. It's too close to homes and parks. It can't exist there. They can relocate and then follow laws there. They need to clean up the environment, and they need to make right to the community of all the people they harmed. I already have a list of people that reached out to me who were severely harmed, who also thought they had severe illness. It was because of freaking Apple dumping toxic waste into the air. Because it's cheaper than doing proper disposal, and because they didn't want to tell anyone they were operating there because people would be upset. So I ask you, share this information, learn more, and get people upset. They should be upset, and Apple has a reason to not want them upset, because people will pick up pitchforks like we did in the 90s and say, absolutely not, this is completely unacceptable. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you all so much. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Ashley, and I'm glad we're able to have your voice here in front of this fabrication plant, because coming down here and seeing this really shows how actually malicious this company is, because you would not know this was a fabrication facility, and there's no Apple sign. How would you know? So the people in the neighborhood, the people in Santa Clara need to know. They have a right to know, and I think the community have to start demanding, what is the mayor of Santa Clara doing? What are the politicians doing about the fact? And Lisa, I'm also a member of the News Guild, Pacific Media Workers Guild, and we need the right to speak out. Journalists need the right to speak out without retaliation, and members who need to speak out around health and safety. So our next speaker is going to be Lisa Milos.
No, I have a question for Ashley first.
Okay, a question for Ashley.
My question for Ashley is the following. The judge that sided with Apple regarding the statute of limitations, do you have the judge's name? Do we know who, if he is the kind of judge that runs for elections, and whether or not he's been receiving any money from Apple or things like that? Because that sounds completely egregious, the way that judge behaved, cowardly, in fact.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. He has a very good reputation, actually, generally. And from what I've heard, Apple's just really good going into court and getting whatever they want through all sorts of psychological violence through the process. I have not seen any evidence he was tampered with in that sense, but Apple definitely did. Apple has spent so much money and hired partners at huge law firms and spent so much effort just to cover all of this up. You know? I think it just goes back to Apple, that instead of, they lied to the court, they lied to the judge, they claimed they weren't under investigation when they were. They made really baseless, like the judge's decision is appealable and it's wrong. It does not fit with the precedent in California. It does not fit with Ninth Circuit precedent. I've been trying to appeal twice now. I keep getting kicked back because my whistleblower case is not done. But Ninth Circuit would absolutely overturn that. And they would say, like, what happened, Judge? You got confused and forgot what the law is. So I don't want to blame him necessarily, but this is just Apple's, litigation tactics. Is to try to make crazy arguments like this that might convince a judge, pick them up, because Apple has a lot of credibility. They have these huge law firms. I am definitely working to appeal it, but in the meantime, the judge did decide that what Apple was doing was so facially illegal that I should have figured it out. And that's part of the basis of my citizen suit. I'll be filing on September 1st. Until my appeal goes through, the City of Santa Clara's fire department hazmat team, what they approved, a federal judge has now decided, was so facially illegal that statute of limitations expired for my claims, because I should have been able to very quickly figure out what Apple was doing if I had looked up the permits and realized that is exactly what could have killed me in my bed. And so I'm arguing that. So I agree with you on your point. I'm also exploiting the bad decision.
Yeah.
If that's where you're ruling, then now we're going to the other court. And I'm going to say the judge said that. So we need to shut this factory down. He said it's facially illegal and can kill people. So let's shut it down.
And also, I mean, you did file a RICO. They've actually conspired illegally, and they've done things illegal, which they should be investigated and prosecuted, but they're not prosecuting them. They're not holding them accountable. And what do you think about the fact that these companies like Apple are not being held accountable? They seem to be above the law.
Is that from you, Lisa?
Sorry.
Is that from you, Lisa?
For you.
That's okay.
No, sorry.
So what do you think about that? The fact that they're not actually upholding the law. Santa Clara, a city of Santa Clara, I mean, it seems like these government agencies should be investigating and prosecuting, but it seems they're above the law. They're not going to be held accountable.
Well, they should be investigated and prosecuted themselves if they're not when it comes to situations like this. In my opinion, this is not environmental law. This is basic public safety. If I can have an arson gas attack in my bed with documented heart failure in my bedroom from their stupid factory that shouldn't be there in the first place, that is not following any of the basic laws, is actively dumping stuff, knowing it's going into people's homes, is covering up all this fact, is making sure the reports aren't being filed, is making sure that people aren't talking about it. I could list for a long time all the reporters who tried to write about this story or write more in depth about the version that Steve told you earlier. I can't get anyone to write about this. This is underlying the other stuff that the mainstream media has mostly accepted, but they won't write about this part. This is off limits. And I think this has to do with semiconductor fab. That, if it's fab, then now we just need it and we won't question it. It literally will kill people, though, There has to be some boundaries, no matter how crazy obsessed the government gets with certain things. And the front line of that is these cities and counties with their hazmat teams and fire departments. They're the ones that get the permits. They're the ones that do the inspections. They're the ones that are supposed to go in regular and check and make sure everything looks okay. My citizen suit complaint details that the Santa Clara hazardous waste team went in, helped Apple cover up unpermitted illegal hazardous waste treatment tanks, helped Apple cover up and refuse to document Apple's illegal emissions of all that air pollution from that roof without any abatement, without any filtering. They helped Apple cover up that they were forging manifests and they had chemicals they weren't supposed to. They went out of their way to not report issues under the right statutes so the US EPA wouldn't find out. And if you look, so it's called CUPA is the program where Cal EPA delegates to these local areas to go implement the state and federal laws. They're under CUPA investigation. They have been for a decade for basic failure to do any of this kind of stuff. So it's not just Apple, it's a lot of these companies. Apple might be more egregious because they're very felonious generally. But this hazmat team is known to do this. So the question is, how many of these facilities, even in just Santa Clara, are operating like this, making people sick? And maybe not so sick you think you're dying, but maybe you have asthma all of a sudden. Maybe you're not sleeping well all of a sudden. Maybe you have a rash. How many of those locations in Santa Clara is because this one team refuses to do basic inspections, do basic enforcement, do basic due diligence, notify other agencies if there's concerns, reach out to the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and be like, they're doing some stuff. You should probably do an inspection. Make sure they have permits. Make sure they're not emitting dangerous stuff. They don't. And the Cal EPA, even though they know that this team is grossly negligent, you can find the reports online. They're public records under the CUPA oversight reports. They've known for over a decade this group is not doing basic due diligence, and they're making them, try to be better. But then the city is like, oh, we don't have money to hire more people. That's our excuse for another year. And the state's just accepting it. That's completely, absolutely unacceptable. One, Santa Clara is one of the, the second wealthiest county in the entire country. So how can you not afford to hire more than 6 hazmat people? When you're also heavily industrial. They just don't want to. They don't want to upset industry. They want the tax funds. They want, the draw of people to move there to work for these places. I don't want to be drawn to work somewhere where I'm going to end up dying at work and at home. My company, Apple, is poisoning me at work and at home. And they've drawn out my whistleblower case for 4 years while accusing me of all kinds of stuff and refusing to engage in good faith just for the point to show that no one should speak up, despite them almost manslaughtering me. So I'm super pissed at the fire department, and they're part of my lawsuit. That's why I'm also suing City of Santa Clara. And I feel like we need criminal enforcement, state or federal, looking at these groups who enable this kind of stuff. Because they're supposed to be the ones that make sure that this kind of thing would never happen. And in this case, if you're wondering, how on earth did a bunch of apartments get built next to a factory operating like this? It's because the fire department knew exactly what Apple was doing, allowed them to not file any of the required permits that would make it public, and while they were going through the 3-year environmental impact report process for those apartments, for the Santa Clara Square, the city, fully knowing what Apple was doing at that location, kept Apple's facility completely out of the environmental impact report. And as you will notice, it is very adjacent to those apartments. It is absolutely insane to not include active, dangerous semiconductor fabrication in an EIR for those apartments. So the city helped cover that up too. And one of the very first people I turned to when I realized there was some kind of acute chemical exposure at those apartments was Mayor Gilmore. I had multiple meetings with her, telling her what was going on. She was pretending to investigate. I don't think she was at all. She said, can you get more people to come forward? I did. She got detailed emails. She got pictures of skin rashes. She got pictures of gross. She got detailed, the stuff when you're exposed to this stuff, it is a gross story of medical symptoms. But it's important because you see that, and if you know what you're looking for, you're like, oh, that's chemical exposure. And she got that. And what did she do? Nothing. Didn't tell anyone. She had to have known what that factory was doing. That's her city. Her planning group approved it. Her building group knew. Her fire department knew. Her hazmat team knew. So she's probably just lying to my face, knowing it was my literal employer who must be responsible. Per the federal judge, it's so facially illegal what they're doing, anyone would be able to figure it out. Therefore, she had to have known, lied to me, and helped Apple cover up that it was my employer that nearly killed me. So yes, long answer to your question, I think there should be criminal enforcement of these oversight agencies if they do this kind of thing and fail to protect public safety.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm Elizabeth Milos. I was just introduced by Steve. I'm a healthcare worker. She can turn him on so she can hear us. It's okay. Yeah, I'm a healthcare worker. I was recently a healthcare worker at University of California, San Francisco, a medical interpreter, and before that, I was involved in interpreting for workers' compensation workers who fell victim to toxic work sites and and for having accidents on the job. And so I am familiar with the many issues that come to play for workers that have to confront these big companies, and basically they get nothing for getting they get retaliated against, and they do not get any kind of serious compensation for the disruption that this causes to their lives, their livelihood, and their health. I'm a medical interpreter, Spanish-English interpreter. I'm also a member of CWA, and I remember back in 2021 when CWA, during its national convention, it was done remotely, they proposed the the PRO Act, and they were really gung-ho about the PRO Act, about how to create unions and to support workers, but they had failed to include something really important, to have more OSHA inspectors hired. Because at that time, in 2021, I investigated this, and there was less than 1,750 OSHA inspectors nationwide for, 200 million workers. I'm using that as a broad category, 200 million. So I made a friendly amendment to that PRO Act resolution, and which was voted on and was accepted. I don't know whether or not it was followed up on, honestly, because they were not happy with having been shown that they had completely dropped the ball on the OSHA in the middle of a pandemic on top of it. Also, I'm here because I'm also a member of UPTI Members for Palestine. UPTI is my union, University Professional and Technical Employees, which represents social workers, pharmacists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, nurse case managers, and research coordinators and IT professionals as well. And CWA also represents, we're part of CWA, the national union, and CWA also represents IT workers. And recently, there was about 50 CWA employees from the IT sector who got fired for opposing being involved in software development that tracked journalists and the civilians all the way back to their homes to bomb them in their homes with the rest of the family. And that software, I believe, is called Where's Daddy? And we here in the southern area in California, in the so-called progressive area of California, we have IT companies such as Palantir, which are directly involved in the genocide of civilians. So we have some level of commonality here. These companies don't give a damn about civilians. They don't give a damn about workers. They don't give a damn about the residents of Santa Clara, San Jose, or anybody in the United States. But rather, they prefer supporting an apartheid government, such as in Israel, which is practicing a live-streamed ongoing genocide in front of the entire world, and has been doing so for quite some time. And this government, unfortunately, has been supplying funding, weapons to this government, to the Israeli government, but also the IT support that this Israeli government is getting in terms of software development, in terms of satellite, in terms of all the different IT components that go into carrying out a genocide and destroying an entire population, and at the same time also forcibly starving almost 2 million people. I think that it's necessary that we mention this. I am absolutely appalled at what's going on with Ashley. I think that this has to do with a much broader picture of the role of IT in the government, and the level of control that IT has over these IT corporations have over our government is basically unprecedented. And when you start thinking about this corporate control, the word that comes to mind is corporativism. Corporativism is the actual definition of fascism. That's one of the definitions of fascism, is the level of corporate control over the democratic processes, or what's supposed to be the democratic processes. So I applaud Ashley for speaking up, and I'm and as a healthcare worker, I'm very concerned about this situation where we have this level of corruption going on in the Santa Clara area, as well as in the United States as a whole. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's wonderful. I'd love to talk to you more later, too. You sound so wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I think that just hit on so many important points of showing that this is just one concrete example of like millions of examples that we could bring up of these companies just operating with pure violence. Mm-hmm. They're fine murdering civilians and children and stuff. Like, of course they don't actually care about their worker health and safety. Of course they don't care about their communities. You know, the stuff we see with that kind of violence shows how they really operate inside and where their real values are. It also shows how tied in they are with these governments, whether it's your city or county or state or federal or whatever it is. They're all in cahoots.
I wanted to mention, we just came back from the CWA convention where Steve, as part of the Pacific Media Workers Guild, a member of CWA, had presented recently a resolution for single-payer health care to his local, which passed his local, and it also passed the convention of the News Guild, the Newspaper Guild, at the CWA convention. But it was never allowed to, it was never even presented to the floor of the convention, a single-payer healthcare system which would have given all workers and residents a possibility of being able to access healthcare on demand without having to worry about the exorbitant healthcare costs, which I imagine you probably had to undergo dealing with your healthcare. So, and you probably, I'm not sure, but you probably lost it now that you're not working, or you have to pay into a system.
You lose it within 30 days, and you're just on your own immediately if they decide to fire you in retaliation for your reporting them harming you, and then take away all of your resources to even take care of your basic medical needs.
Yeah, so that's another issue that we are trying to press our union leadership. Unfortunately, we're dealing with union bureaucracy that's completely tied into the superstructure, and they don't want to address the issues that affect working people and even their own members, which become unemployed from layoffs. There's announced layoffs at my work location where I was working at UCSF, about 200 people, and that's also dealing with privatization. And we're dealing with big corporations and big entities like the University of California. And we also at the CWA convention tried to, we were handing out flyers regarding resolution for Palestine, for us to break ties with Israel and break ties with Histrodute, which is one of the unions, trade unions in Israel that is helped to create the apartheid state of Israel, together with in the 1920s, together with what was the American Federation of Labor at the time. This was before Israel was Israel. It was in the 1920s. And now, that same union, the president of that union signs the bombs that go towards Gaza, and they're deducting the pay out of every Israeli worker, an equivalent of 1 vacation days per month of every Israeli worker, to pay the reservists, the IDF reservists, to commit genocide. So their things are inextricably linked. We're dealing with, and especially when it comes to my union, CWA, we have healthcare workers there in our union. We have journalists in our union. We have IT workers. We have telecom workers. And all those workers, our colleagues in Gaza, are being slaughtered. 1,400 healthcare workers, 260 journalists, unprecedented in the history of journalism. And also we have telecom workers that are trying to keep Gaza connected through the internet instead of being completely in the dark, and they're doing that under bombs. And also, like I mentioned before, we have CWA workers who were fired. 50 of them were fired for refusing to comply and refusing to participate in this genocide with the software that is being developed to kill people and children in Gaza. So there's a lot of things that we have in common here with regard to these IT companies. Thank you.
More than you know. Actually, I want to point this out. I don't think of it a lot because they disappeared forever. But CWA a couple years ago came forward and said they were leading the national organizing for Apple workers.
Right.
They were taking the lead, so no other union should step up, and they're going to take that national effort. And what did they do? They got friendly with Apple. We've only had a couple unions even try to get to bargaining. Everything else fell apart, and they made no actual effort to organize. There's no national campaigns. As far as I know, they've never made any outreach to the corporate employees. They've never made, and you look at these kind of factories, where did the unionizing start in Silicon Valley? Janitors, maintenance staff, frontline workers, people working on the fab lines. It's the people who get sickest the quickest and die the quickest and have the least amount of resources and are seen by these companies as the most easily disposable because they have the least economic output. For these giant war machine corporations that say all this great stuff about values, and then you have unions, and I'm going to criticize CWA because you got started, and I'm just going to add on.
That's fine. Go ahead.
You know, they're going to go out and they're going to say, labor's important to us. People's rights are important to us. It's even worse for them to not actually follow through on that if they're blocking other groups from trying to organize those workers. You know what, CWA, I'm so mad at them because they could have tried to organize a couple groups, but they said they were the ones and blocked everyone else. And you look around and look for how many Apple unions there are. It's not a lot. And this is exactly the kind of locations where unions are supposed to be emerging because of the dire situation that, like, regardless of what else is going on, people are like, we got to protect each other. Literally no one else is going to protect us. And then you have an actual union come in and make it even harder for them to organize and easier to protect the employer, and that's completely unacceptable. That's all I have to say about CWA.
No, you don't have to be sorry about it one bit. In fact, I came, my own union, UPTI, my own union leadership, having a representation of 20,000 members, only allowed, only allotted 4 elected delegates to be able to be elected by the membership for this, when they're allowed 33 according to their numbers, and of course it was only 4. And so I ran, and me and one other member for UPTI Members for Palestine came in 5th and 6th place, but they did not even allow for alternates. So I went to this time I went to the CWA convention as a guest. I was not allowed to be a delegate. They had not allotted that amount. So that's where the democratic processes apparently stop, at the door of the union bureaucracies in this country.
As long as you don't criticize the corporations or actually try to change things or inconvenience business operations, then you can be on the 4-person delegate list.
Well, my union president, Dan Russell, actually stated in the middle of a genocide that they were going to be prioritizing contract negotiations, and they literally took off of the website a resolution that we had passed in 2021 in solidarity with Palestine. So they tried to prioritize contract negotiations for more than a year and a half and have gotten nowhere. Meanwhile, we as UPTI Members for Palestine were bringing forth information to our members during the strikes, and also information about health and safety issues as well.
Thank you so much for that. And if everyone could just take a minute, and again, like, the sense of place. You're in a very specific location where an incredible amount of violence is occurring. Constantly in that location, with all those emissions, all that dumping, all of Apple's cover-ups. How many other witnesses have they threatened? How many other whistleblowers have they tried to cover up? How many people do they know they've hurt? Have covered it up, right? All that's going on. It's the same kind of violence as what's happening in Palestine. It's the same kind of violence. It's killing innocent people for business profit or stealing land or whatever. It's different magnitudes.
Yeah, it is.
It's the same kind of heartless corporate cruelty. And
it is
right there too.
Yeah, the sewer plants were completely destroyed by Israel back in 2014, and they wouldn't allow any construction to go in order to fix it. So the level of water quality was abominable, and now they're not even allowing to send in any water for the last 4 months. So it honestly, the situation has gotten really bad. But yeah, they've made it into a wasteland. Yeah.
So bad. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to thank you, Ashley, and others for being here. And while I was here, I was interviewed by a reporter who came, and he himself was surprised that this was a fabrication factory. He didn't realize that we had a fabrication factory. So this is the first action that's been held in Santa Clara at a fabrication factory that's operating really illegally. First one that's been held, and we want to alert the community, the community, and let them know that they're in danger, and this should be shut down, especially ones that are leaking toxins, highly dangerous chemicals to the people in the community, to the workers. Where is Gavin Newsom and Cal OSHA? What are they doing to protect the workers? And this community here is entitled to know about it. They don't know about it, and we're going to let them know that they have a right to health and safety, and Apple has to be held accountable for toxins and poisoning the workers in the community here. And we're going to make sure that this fight continues. I'm going to thank you for joining us, Ashley, from the East Coast. Solidarity, and we're going to continue to fight to get justice and get accountability, and Apple needs to be prosecuted. They need to shut down this plant. So thanks for joining us. Solidarity, Ashley, and thank you to all the people who participated.